I've been drawing Thomas characters created for the TV series and reimagining them as Railway series characters for some time now, but aside from Bertram and Smudger, there are a number of narrow gauge engines that I haven't adapted into a style reminiscent of the books. It's time to change that by illustrating 3 more engines, all of them narrow gauge. Let's give it a whirl. Mighty Mac was the first narrow gauge engine created for the TV series that wasn't a repaint of an existing character, at least in terms of characters who actually made it into the show. I've covered the predecessor to Mighty Mac, Little Giant, in an earlier video of mine where I covered the mystery engines of the TV series. If I make another video on that topic, I'll have to include Super ED in there somewhere. Mighty Mac is a double fairley locomotive, with a boiler and smoke box on each end, making them a fairly odd engine. My idea for Mighty Mac is that he was built at Crovan's Gate Works specifically for the Skarloey Railway to pull longer trains during the busy months. Perhaps several other engines were undergoing or awaiting overhaul, and so Mighty Mac was brought in to ease the workload of the remainder of the locomotive fleet. The Skarloey Railway doesn't have a number 10, so I've given that number to Mighty Mac. Technically there are already 10 engines on the Skarloey Railway, but Ivo's Flying Bedstead isn't part of the railway's numbering scheme, so Mighty Mac can have that number. I've given them the Skarloey Railway's signature red livery to match the other engines on the line, save for Duke and Rusty. Mighty Mac is another one of those engines who can more or less fit right into the Railway series universe without much retconning. I think the idea of the 2 halves of the engine butting heads at first and getting no work done before setting their differences aside and working as a team could work quite well as an Audrey story. You could probably even flesh out the idea and make it a book-long story arc over the course of 4 stories. This creates some extra conflict because unlike other engines, who can be separated if they don't get along, Mighty and Mac are stuck together, so that's more pressure on them to cooperate and work together even if they don't immediately get along. Whilst I can't remember exactly where I heard this, since I can't seem to find any evidence for it anywhere, I seem to remember an old description for Mighty Mac referring to Mighty as the older half, which on the surface doesn't make a lot of sense since Mighty Mac is technically one locomotive. So that made me wonder, what if Mighty was originally a single fairley, like Taliesin? Perhaps Mighty worked as a single engine on another railway, and after being withdrawn he was sold to the Skarloey Railway as a donor for their new build, much like how the Talyllyn Railway's Tom Rolt is an extensive rebuild of an old whale tank that worked in Ireland. If this is the case, it may explain why Mighty and Mac don't get along at first. Mighty is used to working alone, and now he has a little brother that is permanently stuck to him. It might even explain why Mighty and Mac's faces are so different, despite most twin engines having similar faces to one another. People have objected to Mighty's hair swirl, and it has often been compared to a flesh tumour. We know from characters like Iron Duke that engines can have hair in the Railway series universe, and so I've allowed Mighty to keep his hair, albeit simplified and recoloured black. I suppose this makes it closer to Terence's Widow's Peak than anything else. And so, here we have the finished picture. Proteus first appeared in the Season 9 episode The Magic Lamp, where Skarloey tells the story of Proteus, a magic engine who can grant wishes with his magic lamp. Now the obvious thing for me to do would be to have Proteus be an actual engine character that worked somewhere on Sodor, But I think the idea of engines having their own folklore is an interesting idea and doesn't seem too out of the question for the Railway series. This is just a theory of mine, but I actually wonder if Proteus was supposed to be Duke at first. The 2003 Writer's Bible refers to Duke as ochre in colour, which describes Proteus's colour scheme more so than Duke's, and refers to him as a mythic character. It would also explain why Proteus didn't immediately get merchandise alongside the other Season 9 newbies, instead getting Wooden Railway and Trackmaster toys around 2008 or so, and never getting a diecast toy made. Maybe the writing team were going to use Duke, but the production crew knew they couldn't restore Duke's model in time, much less build a new one in a larger scale, and so they painted Sir Handel's body yellow and plonked it on Peter Sam's chassis. I'm probably wrong, but it's just a thought. My idea is the stories of Proteus were told amongst a small group of engines at first, and then spread across the island as more railways were built. Possibly the mythology of Proteus was inspired by stories that the engines had heard from humans. The name probably comes from the Greek god of the sea, and the magic lamp that grants wishes is obviously based on the story of Aladdin. Perhaps Proteus didn't have a fixed design and different engines interpret his look in different ways. Nevertheless, I based my drawing of Proteus largely on his TV series design. Basically the upper half of Sir Handel's current design, but below the running board he's closer to Peter Sam. Maybe this is how he's viewed by the Skarloey Railway engines, and maybe the standard gauge engines interpret him differently. Different railways may even give him different names and abilities, much like how real folk stories and legends vary from community to community. One thing I have changed about Proteus's design is his face. I feel as though, for a cool, mythical, ethereal locomotive with magical powers, I think his face is a bit on the dopey side. Instead, I've decided to give him an older, more kindly looking face, as I think that fits him better. I've also made his yellow ochre paint scheme more reflective, to make it look more gold. And with that said and done, here is the completed illustration. And last but not least, we have Freddie. Out of all the engines included in this video, Freddie is the character whose backstory I'm going to be changing the most. In the TV series, Freddie returns to the Skarloey Railway after a long absence. Sir Handel knows him from the old days, but Skarloey and Rheneas do not, even though Skarloey and Rheneas were the first engines on the railway before Sir Handel or Freddie were even built. Even if you want to headcanon that Freddie was brought in to help out while Skarloey and Rheneas were away being mended, it doesn't explain why Freddie apparently knows the line more than the first two engines that ran it. Some have theorised that Freddie is a mid-Sodor engine, and that the part of the railway that Freddie's debut story takes place on is a reopened section of the MSR. It's not a bad idea, all things considered, but I figured that I'd go in a different direction and mark off another obscure part of Sodor in the process. My idea is that Freddie was owned by the Sodor Aluminium Company and worked alongside Stewart and Falcon for a few years following the closure of the Mid-Sodor Railway. Upon arrival, both engines were feeling glum after losing not only their old home, but also their best friend Duke, who is languishing in an old shed. Stewart tries to see the bright side of things, eager to discover what new opportunities and adventures await at the aluminium works. But Falcon does not share the same enthusiasm. His short temper is even worse now that his world has been turned upside down. "Everything and everyone I love is gone," moaned Falcon. "We've still got each other," reminded Stewart. "Like I said," repeated Falcon, "everything and everyone I love is gone." Freddie stepped up and acted as a mentor to the two engines. Whereas Duke was more like a father figure to Stuart and Falcon, Freddie was more like an uncle or an older co-worker. He wasn't as strict as Duke and wasn't as averse to recklessness or trying new ideas. In fact, he often encouraged it. Freddie's affinity for taking risks earned him the nickname Fearless Freddie, and was able to cheer Falcon up during these times of uncertainty. Freddie may not have been Duke, but still provided Falcon with the guidance he didn't know he needed. As the years went by, the engines began being used less and less often. Stuart and Falcon had been brought in to help with an expansion project at the works, but now that the job had been completed, there wasn't much for them to do. Freddie would help where and when he could, often pretending to be ill so that Stuart and Falcon could do his jobs instead. But it didn't stop these uncertain times from being more uncertain than ever. In 1952, however, everything changed. Sir Handel Brown, owner of the Skarloey Railway, bought Stuart and Falcon, but Freddie didn't join them. There was still work for him at the aluminium plant, and so Stuart and Falcon had to bid farewell to their mentor figure for the second time. Falcon was especially sorry to say goodbye to Freddie, but he had heard that the new railway that he and Stuart were moving to had passenger trains, and perhaps they'd be just like his old express services during the heydays of the Mid-Sodor. And so, here is the completed image. And there we are. 3 narrow gauge engines from the TV series reinterpreted as Railway series characters. It's been the best part of a month since I last drew any narrow gauge engines, so it was nice to return to the little railways once again. Let me know which one of the 3 drawings you like the best. And make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you next week for another video.